News, play breakdowns, power rankings, storylines you never hear talked about anywhere else. It's all straight shots here, fired by straight shooters. S and Gun. This is the Objective Basketball Podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Objective Basketball Podcast. S here, Lauren joining me as always. A busy week, a busy week in the NBA as usual. We had the Phoenix Suns, a beat writer from the Phoenix Suns, Gerald Bourguet. He was on talking about the Suns and everything on our last podcast. There was almost going to be a debut of the trio in Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, and Bradley Beal. We didn't get that. We're still kind of waiting to see what the hell happens with that team. And you know, just in general, like how it's all going to look. Draymond Green choked Rudy Gobert. And that was, I'm sure, listen, by now, folks, you guys have probably talked about it ad nauseum. He's been suspended for 5 games. It was funny, to be honest with you.
It was crazy.
I thought it was funny. Lauren, I guess, like, real quick, it was funny, right? Like,
I mean,
I know it was crazy that he put him in a chokehold, but
the whole sequence was just, I mean, all the
also
context, everything that was going on there was just like, I mean, even from like Cat not really doing anything to it being so early in the game, it was just like, oh my God, what is going on here? So, I mean, comedy for sure, some entertainment value there.
Yeah. The in-season tournament seems like it's you're getting your money's worth. You know, the trade rumors, trade cycle, everything that's happening there is also kind of starting up a little bit as we near towards December 15th, which for the people who don't know is when some of these newly signed contracts become more available for trade. January 15th is another deadline for that. But it also brought up the conversation of Zach LaVine. The Chicago Bulls are off to a pretty poor start. They're 4-8 to start the season. They haven't been off to the best start yet. To be honest with you, it seemed like it was, you know, a doomed thing from the beginning of the season. But at this point, it seems like they want to kind of rid themselves of this new core and maybe switch it up and change their direction. And that means maybe a new home for Zach LaVine. LaVine is a very good player, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I think he is a stud offensively. He can score in multiple ways. Some people would say he's a 3-level scorer, has his flaws as a defender and playmaker. But I think given in the right situation and the right circumstance, Lauren, he can be a very, very useful player to a very good team. But his contract is massive. He has 4 years left, $40 million pretty much every single year. You can go ahead and look at it like how it breaks down throughout the rest of the 4 years, but it's a pretty chunky contract. And it makes it a little bit tougher to work out where he might get traded and the value you're potentially getting back, considering the Zach LaVine injury history. You know, the knee. He has back issues right now. He obviously hasn't been the healthiest player in his career. He is a guy who relies on that athleticism, that bounce, if you will, to get downhill, get to the basket, become this high flyer. And we really haven't seen him be that high flyer as much anymore because of the injuries. So there are concerns, there are questions around, should you really go ahead and pay up for a guy like Zach LaVine? Lauren, before we get into the conversation about where he might go, what the trade might be, what destinations might be the best, et cetera, because we have to do our due diligence on that front. And I know you love the transaction cycle.
I do love it.
But I do want to ask you, where are you on LaVine in general?
Yeah, it's a loaded question. You mentioned his positives and maybe some of his negatives. But one thing that I do kind of keep coming back to when I'm looking at situations like this, when you're not talking about a Bradley Beal or a Damian Lillard, or where it almost feels like you don't even have to worry about the dollar value, which isn't quite correct, but you get what I'm saying. With Zach, it's much more of a conversation. But when you look at the top tier players in the league right now and the supermax extensions that they're getting and the annual value being closer to $60 million for those top tier number one guys, Zach LaVine, obviously most would agree is not
Right.
that. So 40 million compared to the 60 million, like, do you feel like you would get enough with Zach? 40 million compared to the 60 million. Again, there's a little bit of flawed logic there, but especially when you're trying to construct your finances. But I think that necessarily just throwing the overpaid or overrated or whatever on him isn't necessarily super fair, because I don't think we've seen him in a situation where he could be a number 3 or a number 2, or just exactly what that looks. I mean, I guess right now he's a number 2, but I think on a true, we're competing and we're in a position to actually go somewhere and competing. I think that there's a very real world in which he doesn't feel overvalued or overrated or whatever. But right now, given the narrative, given the success or lack thereof with Chicago in recent seasons, he's got to overcome that label. And so for Chicago, and even for Zach, I think they're going to be faced with some real hurdles in terms of what they're going to be able to get back for LaVine.
Yeah. Yeah, and they've been put in a really tough position just because they don't necessarily. It's weird because he's under contract for a while. He's under contract for 4 years, so I guess they have the leverage, if you will, of him being under contract. In comparison, we talk about Pascal Siakam all the time. He's an unrestricted free agent this year. There's less leverage there for the Raptors in order to get the bang for your buck, if you will. But at the same time, there's also that cosm of he is getting paid a lot of money, and maybe too much money considering the injury history, considering, where he is with his role and whatnot, and also considering where he might want to land that could fit what he is as a player. Personally, this is just my personal opinion. I find LaVine a little bit one-dimensional. I think he leaves a lot to be desired on the offensive end. Now, I'm not saying that means he's doomed as a player. I, in fact, think if he were to be put in the right role, a third option, maybe fourth option on a really good team, he could thrive as like a play finisher. Zach Lowe on his podcast said, hey, there was a world in which the Denver Nuggets traded for Zach LaVine. And if he was in a position where he's playing off of Jamal Murray, he's playing off of Nikola Jokic, he's playing off of maybe Michael Porter Jr. or Aaron Gordon, I don't know what the deal would be, but if he's playing off of those guys as a play finisher, shooter, guy who's like finishing off buckets for them, he can be maximized. He'll look incredible in that type of role. So where can he go is the question now, in terms of like how he can maximize his own skill set and maybe what the Bulls can get as well.
Yeah.
I have a trade for you. I'm going to just open it up with my favorite Zach LaVine trade destination. I think it's a destination that would make a lot of sense. And here it is. Okay. I have it ready, locked and ready to go. Chicago Bulls will be trading Zach LaVine and Alex Caruso to the Los Angeles Lakers in exchange for D'Angelo Russell, Rui Hachimura, Jalen Hood-Schifino, Max Christie, Gabe Vincent, 2029 first-round pick unprotected, and 2 pick swaps. So that is the deal.
Okay.
I think a lot of that value that you see going out from Los Angeles' perspective is also getting Caruso in the deal. Caruso, in my opinion, is a much more okay, let me rewind there. He's not a much more valued player, but I think he is a desired player right now a little bit more than LaVine is when you consider contract and injury and all that stuff and value and all that, right? I think for the Lakers, a team who's trying to win now, getting a guy like Caruso, who's an all-defense member, can really, really pair well with guys like Austin Reeves off of the bench, et cetera, all that stuff, and getting LaVine, a guy who's like an incredible play finisher, shooter, scorer, right? Mixing that with LeBron and Anthony Davis and Jared Vanderbilt and Taurean Prince, and you still have like a decent rotation there to work with. I kind of like it from the Lakers' perspective. And then from the Bulls' perspective, you get D'Lo, who him and DeRozan can keep you feisty. Like, you're not going to be too bad. You know what I mean? And I think Rui can be an interesting fit there. You get a couple of different prospects in Max Christie and Jalen Hood-Schifino, and you get 3 picks as well.
Yeah.
So in terms of value back for those guys, I feel like it's pretty good given all the things I just labeled about LaVine and his concerns. And yeah. So what do you think about the Lakers side of things?
Yeah, I mean, if they could find a way to get LaVine and Caruso, I think it'd be a huge win for the Lakers. And if I'm being completely honest, I do expect the Lakers to end up with Zach LaVine. I just do, even though I don't think that they have the best package to offer. I think for Chicago here, yeah, I mean, on top of the picks that you mentioned, getting multiple guys, especially to sort of, I don't want to say reset the deck because they have a lot of interesting young prospects right now already, but none of them have really popped. And so I think bringing in sort of even some new guys and giving Rui an opportunity to be in a larger role even could bode really well for them. I would be curious to see if they were to try and get Austin Reeves in there or what that ends up looking like, but I will not be surprised at all if any combination or any individual, Zach LaVine, Alex Caruso, or DeMar DeRozan end up in a Lakers jersey.
Yeah, the DeMar DeRozan aspect is interesting. I think if you were to ask Lakers fans last year, hey, can we get a Russell Westbrook DeMar DeRozan swap? They would probably say absolutely. I wonder if that has changed now because of the needs that the Lakers have this season in terms of shooting, in terms of extra defense at the point of attack. Like, DeMar doesn't necessarily fit the build anymore.
Yeah.
He might have last year.
Yeah.
So I guess I have questions on that front, but I could definitely see one of those three. Okay, do you have another Zach LaVine trade destination for me?
I do. And I think we have to just go right here, and it's going to the Eastern Conference. I think we got to go to the Miami Heat. So I've got I've got a follow-up question for you, but this first package that I kind of just loosely threw together is Kyle Lowry, Duncan Robinson, and then it's LaVine, and then there's about $7 million left over. And personally, I don't see how they could squeeze Caruso in there. That's just me value-wise, but I do think you could get an interesting combo of Torrey Craig, Dalen Terry, maybe even just Kobe White, Andre Drummond. I think that they could get some value there as well. But again, to me, this is not an intriguing package. This is just another case where you've got a big market team that just finds themselves inserts themselves into the conversation. So again, I guess for Chicago, you get Duncan Robinson, who's actually looked pretty decent, and then an expiring contract in Kyle Lowry. But again, this is not the best that they can do. Where do you stand on a potential Miami deal?
Yeah, I could see it from Miami's perspective in the sense that, hey, we didn't get Donovan Mitchell, we didn't get Bradley Beal, we didn't get Damian Lillard. There is a chance we can go out and get Zach LaVine, maybe at a cost that we are comfortable with. From the Bulls' perspective, it's like, okay, well, if the Lakers are offering something better, why not just trade him to the Lakers? And 100%. He's a Cali guy, UCLA product. Like, let's just send him home. Sure. You know, all good there. Even if Miami is offering a different package. So I guess that's sort of my thinking from Chicago's perspective. It's like, okay, if we can do better, why not do better? Especially, you know, since I think Zach would be totally comfortable going to the Lakers. For sure. What is the follow-up question? I'm kind of curious.
Yeah. My follow-up question is, I came to it from this standpoint. If Miami said that Bradley Beal was not enough of an upgrade to move Tyler Hero, is it enough of an upgrade? And could you see Miami doing Lowry, Robinson, and Hero for both LaVine and DeMar DeRozan?
Ooh, I don't think so.
No.
Maybe. I don't know if they'd want LaVine and DeMar. I actually would be curious if you said, like, hey, if we did LaVine and Caruso, what would Miami think from that perspective? Because I think LaVine and DeMar, even the Bulls are realizing it, is a little bit redundant.
Work. Yeah.
I agree. Yeah, it doesn't work. And I think if you're Miami, you probably like Caruso's fit a little bit more with your roster, just from a defensive standpoint, point of attack. And then, you know, if you're Chicago, Hero is a pretty good get for what you can really start with. I mean, I'm pretty sure that's the best player we've kind of mentioned so far in these trade discussions, you know? So I don't know. I mean, I think that's interesting. If Miami decides to include Hero for LaVine, but they quote unquote reportedly didn't decide to include him for Bradley Beal or Damian Lillard, I don't know, man. That's kind of shaky. That's
Yeah.
gonna be tough to argue. That's
Yeah.
gonna be tough to debate.
I'm with you.
Okay, I have another Eastern Conference team for
Okay.
you that I'm curious to see what you think.
Yeah.
Okay. So Zach LaVine headed to the New York Knicks. Okay.
Okay.
In exchange, and it's a pretty easy, simple, and plain exchange. Let me just go ahead and do the math right here. Right, I got it here for you. It is going to be 1 second. I got to get some salary going the other way as well. Of course I do. All right. To a certain extent, okay? Zach LaVine for Julius Randle and Emmanuel Quickly and other stuff, right? Just to get to that point, salary wise, you have to add some stuff to that. But in theory, the idea is you take on Julius Randle's contract. The Knicks get Zach LaVine, and as a thank you, the Bulls get Emmanuel Quickly, which is a guy who, all intents and purposes is looking for a bigger contract. He's going to look for a bigger role, and that role could be in Chicago. So what do you think? I don't know if the Knicks do it. That's my thing. I'm not sure if New York does this, but
personally, I don't think the Knicks do this. I think that in my mind, the only way the Knicks do something here is, I still don't even know if they would do it. Is if it were some sort of Evan Fournier, like real, like low ball. But even to do that, I think you would still have to include Emmanuel Quickly and maybe even Mitchell Robinson. And I don't, or even Hartenstein. And I don't think that New York would necessarily be interested in doing that. Especially because the murmurs of Donovan Mitchell are starting to kind of recirculate a little bit. So I think that the Knicks will be good standing pat, but I'll be interested to see if they get in there, because I think the Knicks could really quickly, like you mentioned, put together a solid offer, whether it be kind of a more pieces to the like $10 million range, or just someone like Julius Randle. But Randle's kind of been on a hot stretch lately, so it's hard for me to envision it personally.
Yeah, the only way I could see maybe this happening is if the Knicks are ready to part ways with RJ Barrett. And I'm not sure. I don't think that is the case.
So.
I don't think that would be possible. So I probably lean towards New York sticking with its guns and saying we're gonna kind of like just stick the path here. And you said Donovan Mitchell, wait for Donovan Mitchell, maybe wait for Joel Embiid. Yeah, just chill, right?
Yeah, just
Okay. Do you have another team for me by any chance?
Yes, I've got teams all day long. Let's go. I mean, come on. I think we need to go across.
This is like Christmas for
I
you.
am.
I feel
I'm like, oh, I love it. As soon as I saw, I think it was Shams that tweeted it. I was like, and I tweeted, we didn't even get through November because this is, I just love it. But yeah, no, I think we need to go across the bridge and go over to Brooklyn, because to me, I think that this is a perfect opportunity for both sides to get to accomplish a big goal here. And I think that Brooklyn could get off of Ben Simmons, and it would just be a 1-for-1 swap. Plus picks, obviously. But I think Brooklyn could even just attach their least appealing first round picks. And I truly don't even know how many it would cost. I think you could attach 2, like, I'm not even going to go down that route. Brooklyn, I think, could very easily get this deal done, and I would truly love to see him in Brooklyn. I think that that's a good, like, defense, switchable size. Surround him with the size. I want to see what it looks like.
Yeah. I don't hate that. I don't know why I don't hate that. I feel like from Chicago's perspective, you're probably not loving the fact that Ben Simmons is the only guy coming. Can you maybe squeeze in one of their prospects? Can you give me Derek Whitehead, or can you give me Noah Clowney? I would be shocked if the Nets are willing to part with Cam Thomas. There's just no way that's going to happen. But
I think you could
just
probably
give
get
me
one
kind of interesting. Yeah. I don't know. I think that's interesting. I haven't heard the Nets yet as a LaVine destination. I really like the idea of that from the Nets perspective. It's just about how are you going to get Chicago to be okay with that trade?
Right.
I mean, keep in mind that like the Nets also have some tough pick situations. I know they got a bunch of stuff from Phoenix, so they're kind of okay in that department, but they don't have any of their picks anytime soon.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that gives them incentive actually to go out and be better, right? And yeah, I could see it. That's an interesting case. And then you have Mikal, you have Cam, you have Zach LaVine, you still have, the core of Dorian Finney-Smith and Nick Claxton. That's a fun team.
It would be
That's
so
a fun team. I don't know if it's like, is that team better than the Atlanta Hawks currently? Is my question.
Oh boy. If they don't pick a direction, then yeah, I think they
Would
are.
we say yes?
I think if Atlanta picks a direction,
yeah, that's a good question.
If Atlanta picks a direction,
Mhm.
and that direction is Onyeka Okongwu, and they move on and really, really commit,
right,
then I think Atlanta's the better team. But if they keep this sort of,
right.
I don't know, then I'm gonna take Brooklyn.
Right. It's interesting.
I think it's
it is interesting.
I think it's one
I don't
one that
necessarily
people should
hate it.
Yeah,
I don't hate it
on.
at all. Okay. I have another trade candidate for you here.
Okay.
And this is the Indiana Pacers. Okay?
Yes.
They're good right now. They have the best offense in the league by far. Why not make it the best offense in NBA history right now? If you add Zach LaVine to this group, they're probably not going to be able to stop a nosebleed, right? They're not going to play any defense, right? Mm-hmm. But they will be very, very hard to stop on any given night offensively. Now, the tricky part is getting there with the salary. Yep. They obviously just let go of Daniel Tice, so they don't have that contract cushion to be able to work out to get to $40 million. You can kind of piece together things. Buddy Hield, TJ McConnell, maybe add in like Aaron Nesmith and Obi Toppin, and you're there, right? Mm-hmm. But I'm not sure if the Pacers would be willing to do that for a guy like LaVine, who is like, he's doubling down on that offensive philosophy for them. Mm-hmm. He does make them good. Like, I think they become a really, really awesome offensive team. Mm-hmm. But long term, are you liking a LaVine Halliburton backcourt with Bruce Brown, Miles Turner, etc.? I don't know. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think the question there would be like, how high are you on Tyrese Halliburton? And I don't think anyone is low on Tyrese Halliburton anymore. Mm-hmm. So personally, like, I think it's something that you definitely entertain. I think it's something you entertain, especially considering the pieces going out. I really think that it's sort of I mean, to me, TJ McConnell and I had Buddy Hield, TJ McConnell, and Jalen Smith gets them there because of the Pacers cap situation right now. So if that player personnel wise is what's going out, I don't hate that for Indiana at all. I really just think it will come down to, well, not just this, but one thing is, how much does Chicago, how much control do they give or influence do they allow Zach to have? And is he interested in Indiana? I do think having a coach like Rick Carlisle, who offense X's and O's, like, that's right up his alley. I think having Zach LaVine and giving Zach LaVine an opportunity to play both on and off ball would be really, really intriguing. So I really like the fit, actually. And I even think that personally, I am high enough on Tyrese Halliburton on both sides of the ball and the pieces around them that I think that backcourt, especially size-wise, would be something worth giving a go. And so, I mean, if I'm Indiana, I would say go for it, but I also am hesitant because is Zach LaVine at the point where he only wants to play for big markets and contenders? I don't know. That's a big question that I have.
That's fair. I think that's fair to assume. Okay. Any other Zach LaVine trade destinations? I know there's one. There's actually two, and maybe this is a way we can segue into our own teams.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm interested to hear if you think LaVine is a Mavericks destination, and if they should take a swing at him. What do you think? Just in general, I don't even know what the deal would be or what it would look like, but like, how does LaVine look on the Mavericks?
Personally, I don't see LaVine. If this were pre-Kyrie, I would say they would be all over this, but personally, I just don't see any world. I mean, even before the start of the season, I would have said maybe they can try to work something out with Tim Hardaway Jr. and Maxey, and maybe they try to just add that much more top-heavy talent. But now it doesn't make sense. It would really, really hinder them cap-wise and make things just more difficult, where they have finally gotten to a point where they have a pretty good cap situation right now. They're kind of like in a sneaky way. They've actually got a pretty solid books right now. So I don't see a world in which they try to pull this one off, but I definitely think that there are maybe a few Western Conference teams that could get real spicy here real quick for Zach LaVine.
Yeah. Okay. Wait. Yeah. Throw out some names here. I think like I can think of. Are you thinking of the Pelicans?
I am actually not, because I was thinking that did occur to me, and I just off the top of your head, do you think that they would? The thing is like money wise, it would either have to be Zion or like their entire front court. I do think the Pelicans are interesting. The challenge there is you have to decide: are you open to moving on from Zion, or are you going to trade Jonas Valanciunas, Larry Nance Jr., pretty much your whole front court depth to make the money work? So I think that there would be big challenges there. And personally, if I'm New Orleans, I'm holding on to Zion. I think the Zion situation is actually a lot worse than maybe some realize, or maybe is being taught. I shouldn't say some realize. Maybe that's being talked about. So we'll see what happens there. But I don't think that this is the situation that they should consider moving on from Zion for. So I think the two teams that.
What about an Ingram? What about Ingram LaVine?
I wouldn't do
an
it.
Ingram LaVine swap.
I wouldn't do it. I think Ingram is
if you're Chicago or New Orleans.
New Orleans. I would not move Ingram. There are very few people I'd probably move Brandon Ingram for, to be honest. If you're New Orleans operating, if you're New Orleans, I don't think you can afford. I think the two teams that intrigue me the most, you mentioned them earlier, the Denver Nuggets, and then the other one is the Memphis Grizzlies. I think Memphis.
Interesting.
I think Memphis could really, really make something happen, but like I said, I don't. I think Memphis and Brooklyn. To be honest, I think Memphis and Brooklyn could get this deal done. This is another situation. We talked about this earlier today, where everyone's got their eyes on one team, and I still think it will be the Los Angeles Lakers. But Memphis, Brooklyn. Maybe Denver, but I don't think so. Maybe Indiana, but I think Brooklyn and Memphis could be the two to just come out and snipe them out of nowhere. I really do think that they have the power to.
The tough thing with Memphis going after him is just where you're going to get that salary from, and also how are your books going to look afterwards? Because Bane's extension kicks in next year.
Yep.
You have Morant, you have Jaren Jackson Jr., you have Marcus Smart. It becomes really tricky for a small market team to become essentially a second tax apron team. And that's why I thought of Minnesota as a Zach LaVine team, because I was like, hey, just straight up Cat for LaVine swap.
Yeah.
Just do it.
I thought about it too. Yep.
And I can understand it from a fit perspective, because LaVine, Edwards, J Mac, Rudy Gobert kind of makes more sense than Cat with Rudy. But I just don't see it from a money perspective. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me for them to double down and have a $40 million player when they still have Cat that they're on their books and trying to work out. And then on the other side, Chicago gets Cat and Vooch doesn't really make sense either. Like, how is that going to look? And okay, now you got to find a new home for Vooch. And it just, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And I think that's what kind of catches me off guard with the Grizzlies. It's like, there's a lot of maneuvering after the trade that you have to do from both sides. That kind of makes me think like, I don't know if either team would be too willing to jump the gun on this. I've seen a lot of people bring up the Raptors as a Zach LaVine
I've
trade
seen it too,
destination. Like a lot. And I can understand the reasoning behind it, because, you're not going to be able to, again, the Bulls aren't going to be able to get a lot for Zach LaVine. So there's a world in which you don't have to give up Pascal Siakam. You're obviously not giving up Scotty Barnes, and you're not giving up OG Anunoby either. And you add LaVine to that group. And LaVine fits in like a glove. He's the shooting. He's everything. You know, we've talked about it ad nauseum on this podcast of how much the Raptors need shooting. They need extra ball handling. And LaVine fits like a glove from that perspective. But also, the Raptors aren't in a position really to give up picks. And that's what the deal would be. It would be Gary Trent Jr., it would be Thad Young, it would be Chris Boucher, plus all of the other pick cachet that the Raptors have, which is, I think, 2028 and 2030. And then they could give up pick swaps as well. I just don't see the Raptors having those pick protections on the Spurs pick and Jakob Poeltl and all that stuff, saying we're going to double down on this roster, especially given the fact that they have, as I've mentioned 101 times on this podcast, two unrestricted free agents that are massive, right? Pascal and OG. And when you have that uncertainty in your future, you're sort of wondering to yourself, like, should I even go after this if I don't know if I can retain this core and keep this core together? So that's where I'm unsure if the Raptors were to do it. If you were to tell me it is a Pascal for LaVine swap, like they are just straight up swapping teams, I don't see why the Raptors would do that.
Okay.
Yeah. Wait, do you like that idea? Wait,
no,
do you like
I don't. I don't. I think I don't like that for
know.
Toronto. But
I
I
don't know
thought
what
you
the
were like
temperature check is on that.
No. Personally, I think that would be a bad move for Toronto.
No.
I think Pascal has a lot more value.
Yeah.
But no, I thought for a second there,
Yeah,
I was like, oh,
I
is he
agree. I
torn?
agree.
Is
And-
he torn on that?
No. I just, so there's like a bunch of different reasons why I don't think LaVine to Toronto makes sense. I imagine Toronto does their due diligence. They probably reach out, they ask to Chicago, they see what the price is, they see what they can do. But again, this is me talking from a perspective of common sense. Conventional wisdom would say the Raptors don't trade for a player like Zach LaVine because they already have picks out the door. They have a lot of uncertainty headed into the future. They're not in a position to win now, and therefore they shouldn't trade for Zach LaVine. But also, conventional wisdom said they shouldn't have traded for Jakob Poeltl. Conventional wisdom said they shouldn't have traded for Thad Young. Conventional wisdom, maybe, actually no, I think letting Fred VanVleet walk is probably fine, given the price tag that Houston got him at. But
I'm kidding.
Ultimately, I just think this team does not think in the conventional way, and maybe they think they are closer to winning than we look at them right now. So maybe you add Zach LaVine to that team. You have Pascal, you have Zach LaVine, you have OG, you have Scotty Barnes, obviously, you have Dennis Schroeder, you have Jakob Poeltl. That's a really, really good starting five. Like a really good starting five. And then, you've lost some depth to your bench. How are you going to manufacture that depth? We'll see. But ultimately, I guess it gives you more of a chance in the Eastern Conference. I don't think it makes you at the same tier as a Philadelphia, which we haven't talked about as a LaVine destination yet.
Oh, right.
I don't think it puts you in the same conversation as Boston or Milwaukee. And so I just don't see it from the Raptors' perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I've been wrong so many freaking times on this podcast about seeing it from the Raptors' perspective because they always go the opposite way of what I'm thinking. So, it's just, it's so tough to gauge what this team's going to do. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I think similar to the Raptors, there are and we don't need to go down the whole path, but I think you can sort of lump into the same category in terms of there are clear, pretty big questions that could hold this up. And I think the Pistons, the Magic, even OKC a little bit, the Hornets, Utah, there's a group of teams that can put together honestly really good packages for Chicago that should be the second you see it, send it in, that good. But I just don't see, I don't know that I necessarily see Chicago sending him there. And the last thing that I want to say on this is one thing that I'm very curious to see how this goes, is just how the situation is handled. Does it deteriorate to a point where Chicago is I don't really want to send you where you want to go. I mean, I'm not saying that that's going to happen or that there's even a ton of signs saying that that's where we're headed, but I do think that it's something to monitor sort of in this day and age is how do the relationship dynamics influence just how these things unfold, because they do tend to just happen really quickly. So I'm going to be keeping an eye on that, and I'm not counting out, the Pistons, the Magic, the Hornets even, and maybe Utah. I think there could be some intriguing things there for sure.
Yeah, Utah is an interesting one because they definitely do have the salaries, and like they're in a position with picks and whatnot to go out and get that guy if they want to.
Yep.
And like him and Markkanen and Kessler, that could be a fun team.
Yeah, I mean,
really
Jordan Clarkson.
Even Orlando, like Orlando and Detroit, they're so. Yeah,
and they both have significant log jams.
Orlando and absolutely, yeah. Orlando and Detroit, they're so spacing deprived right now that a guy like LaVine could jump in there and make a really, really big difference on the team. Again, I just wonder, given where they are in their respective cores and how young they are, if they're willing to make that win now move, which is why maybe Brooklyn is an intriguing one.
Yeah.
And Brooklyn kind of jumps out to me as a team that like kind of needs to win now because of their pick situation, and has some players that are on the older side in Mikal Bridges, in Cameron Johnson, who are like ready to compete now.
Yeah.
They could be like a frisky 4-5 seed with LaVine. Now that I'm thinking about it. So I don't know. You've kind of sold me on the idea of Brooklyn. I didn't really come into this thinking about it. I will say, I really hope the Philadelphia 76ers don't trade for Zach LaVine. I think Tyrese Maxey is awesome. I think you don't need another offensive-minded guard who is lacking in the defense department. And I just don't see the fit with LaVine. If you're giving up picks, if you're giving up players, I really just think you should just wait.
Yeah.
And go after a big kahuna in free agency, whoever that might be, whether it be OG Anunoby or Pascal Siakam or whoever. So, yeah, I'll wait. I think the Sixers should wait. And when it comes to LaVine, who knows what'll happen, ladies and gentlemen. We have until December 15th to decide, how it's going to shake out. January 15th is also another deadline in terms of when players are available. Most of those Lakers players that we mentioned are available on January 15th. So I doubt we see a move anytime soon, but it's just, I guess this is a way we can maybe end this conversation, Lauren. What a weird and sad and depressing 10 to 15 years, maybe 20 years of Chicago Bulls basketball. You obviously have the highlights of the Derrick Rose and Joakim Noah and Jimmy Butler era, very close to NBA Finals runs. You get an MVP in there. You have just like an incredible, iconic type of stretch of basketball there for a little bit. You have the fun Bulls era of Kirk Heinrich and Ben Gordon and Luol Deng, and like that's like a frisky, fun team that nobody wants to face in the playoffs. And like I remember growing up watching them with Andres Nocioni and like, guys like that. And you're like, oh, that was a fun team, right? Yeah. A very, very fun team. But ultimately, the last 10 to 15 years of Bulls basketball has been, just to kind of recap it, right? Derrick Rose injury, okay? Jimmy Butler emerges, okay? He becomes a star in place of Derrick Rose. Jimmy Butler and Tom Thibodeau clash a little bit. Jimmy Butler and Tom Thibodeau become best friends afterwards. But the Chicago Bulls don't want to pay Jimmy Butler. And Jimmy Butler gets pissed off and says, I will bet on myself. He goes out there and wins most improved player. Now the Bulls are forced to pay him. They pay Jimmy Butler. They don't build a good enough team around Jimmy Butler. We all remember the Dwayne Wade, Rajon Rondo, and Jimmy Butler team, which went absolutely nowhere. And then Jimmy Butler decides to get moved to a different team. They trade Jimmy to the Minnesota Timberwolves, okay? The Jimmy Butler era is over. They have entered a tank, okay? In that tank, you get players that emerge. Obviously, Zach LaVine was part of that trade, and LaVine is now there. Lauri Markkanen was part of that trade. He's now there. Wendell Carter Jr., this interesting big man, arrives in Chicago. And when you think of those names down, two of them are not in Chicago anymore, and LaVine is the one remaining player. They go out and they trade Wendell Carter Jr. and 2 first-round picks. That one that turns out to be Franz Wagner, and the other one, I believe, I don't know who else that turns out to be. I'm blanking now, but one turns out to be Franz Wagner, who by all accounts is probably going to be an all-star level player. So you traded Wendell Carter Jr. and Franz Wagner for 3 years of Nikola Vucevic, who, by all intents and purposes, is beginning to dwindle in his career as a 30-year-old big man. Okay? On top of that, you trade Lauri Markkanen, the player that you got in exchange for Jimmy Butler, along with LaVine. You trade Lauri Markkanen just to get rid of Lauri Markkanen, and you get rid of him. I believe it was for a first-round pick or something. You get that. He goes to Cleveland. He inevitably ends up going to Utah and wins the Most Improved Player award. He is now an all-star, potentially an all-star level player for a consistent amount of time. Lauren, they tried to salvage this situation, and they attempted to, and it was really fun for about 2 months in October and November of 2021, when it was Alex Caruso, when it was Lonzo Ball, when it was DeMar DeRozan. The Bulls are back. Zach LaVine, Nikola Vucevic, this team is fun. How do they have the number 1 defense in the NBA? And then, boom, Lonzo Ball gets hurt. It all comes crashing down, and now we're in this situation again. If I had to be a Bulls fan for the last 10 to 15 years, I'm not sure how much more I could take, because it is tough. Just even recapping all of that to you hurts me as a basketball fan. So I feel for Chicago Bulls fans. It has been such a depressing time in the fandom that it hurts me. So I guess that's where I'm at. I wanted to just mention that, because when we're thinking of Zach LaVine trade rumors and where he might go and what they might end up with, it's just been really, really unfortunate. Some of that is self-inflicted through the trades and through the moves that they made. And some of that is just sheer bad luck. It's from injuries, from guys not wanting to be there, etc. And yeah, tough break for the Chicago Bulls. Lauren, any thoughts?
Yeah, the way that this has come, well, I don't want to say it's come to an end, but it definitely feels like it's not an end until the last of all of these moves are gone. But I do sort of expect Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan to be gone. I think Alex Caruso, if the Bulls are smart, they will maximize on the demand for Alex Caruso right now. But sometimes moving 3 really solid players is hard, and so that can be a hard thing to pull, or like a hard thing to do. But I do think that that's the right move for them. I think trying to get something for DeMar before he's a free agent and walks is the right thing to do. And again, I think DeMar, wherever he goes next, he's going to be good, but I do think that the offers are going to be really low, because I think everyone knows that he won't be sticking around. So it makes me sad to see how this has all sort of come to an end for Chicago, especially when you consider Lonzo Ball's time in there. That is pretty sad and upsetting. But I do think that right now, this is an opportunity for them to sort of just reset the deck and just try and move on. So we'll see what they do. I think it would be very wise of them to try and maximize on the draft assets, but I don't know if they'll do that. I really don't.
Yeah, it's such a brutal situation to be in if you're a Bulls fan, and look, teams will go through ruts. NBA franchises go through ruts. The Toronto Raptors were in a rut for a very long time before Masai Ujiri came in. Sometimes you need that change in ownership, change in management to really change the outlook of a team. The Knicks were a tire fire for, the majority of this decade until they came and, they changed management and things started to change up. The Kings were a tire fire for a very long time. I mean, longest playoff drought in NBA history, all that stuff. And it changed because different management, different ownership style, whatever, right? It worked out because things changed. The way their approach was different. And I wonder if that's the thing that needs to happen in Chicago, because yeah, it's tough. Very, very tough. The Bulls have a very awesome history. Michael Jordan, 6 championships, dominated the 90s. You can't talk about basketball without talking about them. But it's just really depressing, honestly, to think about, what this team has gone through over the last 15 years, what this franchise, what the fans have gone through over the last 15 years. So this was a very Chicago Bulls centric podcast. It's funny because we didn't even have a Chicago Bulls guest on. We will probably at some point this year have a Chicago Bulls guest on to discuss everything that's happening. But next week, ladies and gentlemen, we have a Minnesota Timberwolves beat writer to come on and talk about the ever prevailing, maybe rising, maybe potentially championship contending Minnesota Timberwolves, and obviously Anthony Edwards, Rudy Gobert, and maybe chokeholds. We'll talk about chokeholds too. Okay, Lauren, from you, from me, from everybody at the Objective Basketball Podcast, thank you very much for listening to the Objective Basketball Podcast, and we will see you guys later. Take care.
Follow hosts at Just S. Barahini on all socials and at The Lauren Gunn on Twitter. The Objective Basketball Podcast, delivering the NBA to you like no other.